Hello, and thank you for watching my video. I'm Tim Walker, and I'm the pastor of Staves United Methodist Church in Des Moines, Iowa. And I want to share some more thoughts with those of you willing to listen about the coronavirus pandemic. Last week, I read an article in the United Methodist News Service about whether or not the coronavirus pandemic is divine judgment. And the pastor who wrote the article strongly disputed that this pandemic is a result of divine judgment. And in that article that he wrote, he goes on to say that for most of the contemporary theologians today, they have abandoned the whole idea of divine judgment. And to a large degree, that is true. Many of the contemporary theologians don't talk about divine judgment, not because it's not in the Bible anymore, but because it's a very unpopular topic to write about or to talk about. And I think they got tired of taking the static about it. But anytime you look at a calamity and you call it God's judgment, people will always recoil. And they'll say something to the effect of, well, how could a loving God do something like that? So did God send the coronavirus pandemic as divine judgment? Honest answer is, I don't know. I haven't received any divine word myself saying that it is or isn't, but at the same time, I can't dismiss it. I can't dismiss the possibility. But you know what? I think there's a better question we could be asking. And a better question to ask is, can God use this pandemic as a means to draw people to himself? And the answer to that is a resounding yes. And you see, with the Old Testament prophets who warned the people of the impending doom and announced that it would come to pass, is that people did not listen to all that they had to say, because the prophetic message ultimately is a message of hope, that there is hope in the face of judgment. The prophet Jeremiah uses that exact phrase, that there is hope in the face of judgment, and that there is hope through judgment. Now, the prophetic pattern goes something like this, is that they point out and decry the evil that they see going on among the people of God. They warn them that if they continue in their way, that there's going to be a calamity come upon them. And then that calamity occurs, and they interpret that calamity as being God's judgment on their behavior. But that's only the first half of the prophetic message. The second half of the prophetic message is the hope and joy that awaits those who do return to God on the other side of this calamity. The book of Isaiah is 66 chapters long. And you don't start hearing about the message of hope until long about chapter 40. And by that time, most people have given up reading. And so today, like I said, I can't dismiss out of hand that this might be God's judgment. And if it is, I want to talk about the second half of the prophetic message, about the hope that can await us on the other side of this calamity. Because, I see people and businesses of all sizes banding together and helping one another out. In the recent weeks, I haven't seen the usual news cycle of people lining up on ideological lines and then sniping at one another and calling one another stupid and criticizing one another. I haven't seen as much of that. I really can't recall any of it specifically. And, that gives me hope, because that's the kind of world I would like to live in. I'd like to live in a world where we set aside ideology and we look at one another as being human and treating one another as human and serving one another as if we are human beings. That's the kind of world I would like to live in. And in Old Testament times, the main reason for divine judgment was idolatry. In other words, worshiping idols. People would try to worship God and worship their idols. They tried to serve God and serve their idols. And there's a piece that's been going around Facebook for several weeks now, and I want to read just the first paragraph to you. And this one interprets the calamity or this pandemic as being divine judgment. And it says this: in 3 short months, just like he did with the plagues of Egypt, God has taken away everything we worship. God said, you want to worship athletes? I'll shut down stadiums. You want to worship musicians? I'll shut down civic centers. You want to worship actors? I'll shut down theaters. You want to worship money? I'll shut down the economy and collapse the stock market. You don't want to go to church and worship me? I'll make it where you can't go to church. And you see, friends, the reason why I can't just dismiss out of hand the possibility of this global pandemic being divine judgment is because idolatry is not just an Old Testament problem. It is a right now, here, today problem, because you see, the human heart is a factory of idols. And I want to give you some practical advice about looking at what you might have set up in your life as an idol. And I want to give you some practical advice about turning from that idol. I want you to begin by asking yourself the question, what is it that you really have your heart into? What is it that makes your blood pump? Now, when I'm in a small group of people and I ask this question, I tend to get similar answers from similar people. A lot of times, women in the group will say, well, the thing that I really have my heart into is my family, my children and or grandchildren. That's what makes my blood pump. The men in the group will tend to give one of two answers. Sometimes men will say that, well, what they really have their heart into is their job, especially if it's a high-paying job or it's a job that they particularly enjoy. Or men will say something to the effect of that what they really have their heart into is their favorite sports team or one of their hobbies or something like that. And for me, what I really have my heart into is ministry. And all of those things can become idols. And you might say, well, now, wait a minute, Pastor Tim, how can serving God become an idol? Well, without going into a lengthy explanation and sharing some lengthy stories from my own life, let me just suffice it to say that it is possible. I figured out a way to do that. And whatever it is that makes your blood pump, whatever it is that you've got your heart into, whatever it is that is what gives you a reason to get out of bed in the morning, I want you to look at the passion and devotion at which you pursue those things. And then use that passion and devotion to pursue God, through prayer and through Bible reading and through serving one another and serving the church. And I've been on the phone a lot the past few days and have been talking to people, and that I could go on for several more minutes talking about all the answers to prayer that's been happening in our church, and I'd like to do that sometime. But whatever it is that you have your heart into, look at the passion and devotion that you pursue that with, and then pursue God with that same kind of passion and devotion. Now, I do want to say a special word to Staves Church. And I want to say thank you to the members of Staves. You guys are awesome. Dave has been keeping me informed about the monetary donations that have been coming in. You've also been very good about keeping up your donations to the food pantry, which is desperately needed at this time. Many families are in need, and you guys are stepping up and meeting that need. And I want to say thank you. The numbers have just been awesome. And I want to say a word about giving, because the size of your gift is not as important as the attitude of your heart in which you give that gift. The Apostle Paul at 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7 tells us that what's really important about giving to God's work monetarily is the attitude of your heart with which you give, and that it needs to be a joyful attitude in giving to God. And you know what? Staves exemplifies that joyful giving, that joy in giving to God. All of the other churches I've served have not been like that. At best, their attitude toward giving has either been Well, see it as a duty, as an obligation, something that you ought to do, something that you must do, you should do, and so just grit your teeth and do it. That's been at best. At worst, I've had churches where people have said to me, "Well, I'm not rich, so supporting the church is somebody else's problem." But that's not been the case with Staves. You know, you guys give with a joyful heart, and I want to thank you for that. I also want to say thank you because I used to be the kind of Christian who gave with a sense of obligation. It's something that I ought to do, I should do, I must do, just grit your teeth and do it. But in the 4.5, coming up on 5 years that I've been at Staves, your joyful attitude in giving has infected me and has changed me. Uh, Last year, the church board gave me what I considered to be a very generous raise, and one of my first thoughts was, "Well, good. Now I'll be able to give even more to God's work." And when I write that check out every 2 weeks, I feel good about that. I'm no longer look at it as an obligation, something I must do or should do or ought to do. Rather, I say, thank you, God, that I have the means to be able to do this, that I have the means to be able to support your work at this level. And so I just wanted to give you guys another word of encouragement. And I thought it would also be important for you guys to know that you have infected me in a good way, that you have taught me about the joy in giving. And I want to say thank you for that as well. So thank you all for listening. And I look forward to whatever comments you might have on this video. So goodbye for now.